third party lost control. She fought with him yesterday because he said you're my beloved child. Yesterday, something happened behind closed doors that changed the entire atmosphere between your soulmate and the third party. It began with a conversation that was supposed to stay calm, but one sentence from him shattered that possibility. The third party had been questioning him, pushing for reassurance, trying to understand why he had become emotionally distant. At first, he avoided giving a direct answer. Then she asked the one question he could no longer escape: if you could choose without worrying about anyone else, who would you really want? There was a long silence. And what he finally said made her lose control. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. He simply admitted that his feelings had never disappeared for someone else. But here is what made yesterday different. This time, he refused to take those words back. And the person he was talking about was much closer to your heart than the third party wanted to believe. Her reaction was immediate. She demanded to know whether he had been secretly thinking about you all this time, and instead of denying it the way he may have done before, he became strangely calm. That calmness frightened her more than anger would have. She reminded him of everything they had been through and demanded an explanation for why he suddenly seemed willing to risk their connection. Then he said something she wasn't prepared to hear: this wasn't sudden at all. His feelings had been building quietly, and pretending they weren't there had become exhausting. Don't skip, because what happened next exposed the real reason their argument became so intense. The third party wasn't only upset that you were still in his thoughts. She realized he had recently made a private decision involving you, a decision he hadn't discussed with her. She kept asking what he had done, but he wouldn't tell her. Instead, he said there were certain choices he needed to make for himself now. That was when the argument stopped being about jealousy and became about fear. Because beneath all her anger, the third party understood exactly what those words meant. Something she had once believed was safely under her control was slipping away. She asked him one final question: are you saying you would choose that person over everything we have? He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then came the sentence that changed the room completely. You're asking me to keep pretending I don't know who I really want. She went silent. He didn't need to say your name for her to understand. But something even bigger happened after that argument ended. He walked away, took out his phone, and stared at something connected to you for several minutes. He almost acted on the decision he had been hiding, but stopped at the last second. Not because his feelings changed. Because he realized that once he took this next step, there might be no way to return to the life he had been living. And what he was preparing to do next is exactly what the third party was terrified of discovering. What happened after he walked away was even more revealing than the argument itself. He didn't go back to explain himself, and he didn't rush to repair what had just broken between them. Instead, he stayed alone with his phone in his hand, staring at something connected to you that he had apparently returned to more than once. It wasn't simple curiosity. There was emotion behind that silence. He started typing something, stopped, erased it, and began again. Meanwhile, the third party could feel that something had shifted. She followed him and demanded to know whether he was planning to contact you. This time, his answer wasn't a denial. He quietly said, I need to stop letting fear make every decision for me. That sentence hit her hard because she suddenly understood something. You weren't becoming important to him again. In his heart, you had never stopped being important. But the argument took another unexpected turn when she accused him of comparing everything between them to what he once felt with you. He could have avoided the question. Instead, he admitted that whenever he tried imagining his future honestly, something felt missing. She asked him exactly what was missing, and his silence answered before his words did. Then he finally told her that being with someone while emotionally looking backward wasn't fair to anyone. That admission changed her anger into panic. She began bringing up old promises, memories, and everything she believed should convince him to stay. Yet none of it produced the reaction she expected. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was listening with the calm expression of someone who had already reached a conclusion internally. Stay till the end, because there was one detail she noticed in that moment that made her realize his decision might be much further along than she thought. She looked at his phone again and noticed that whatever he had been preparing wasn't something he had just thought of during their fight. He had apparently been carrying this decision quietly before yesterday. That explained his recent distance. It explained why certain conversations had suddenly become uncomfortable. And most importantly, it explained why he wasn't desperately trying to save the situation now. The third party asked him whether he had already made plans involving you. He looked directly at her but refused to give her the reassurance she wanted. He only said, "There are things I should have handled differently a long time ago." Then he left the room. But minutes later, something happened that she wasn't supposed to see. His phone briefly lit up where he had left it, revealing just enough information on the screen to make her expression change completely. Because what she saw suggested that his next move wasn't simply about sending you a message. He had been preparing something far more serious, and suddenly, she knew exactly why he had been keeping it secret. The moment she saw that screen, her anger turned into something much more unsettling: certainty. There was evidence of a plan he had been quietly considering, something involving a place, a date, and a conversation he clearly intended to have without her present. She couldn't see every detail before the screen went dark, but she saw enough to understand that this wasn't an impulsive reaction to yesterday's fight. He had been thinking about reaching a turning point for days. When he returned, she immediately confronted him. "Were you planning to see them?" she demanded. His expression changed, not because she was wrong, but because she had discovered something he wasn't ready to explain. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked one chillingly simple question: "Why were you looking at my phone?" And suddenly, the balance between them shifted again. She ignored his question and demanded the truth. Was this why he had been distracted? Was this why he kept pulling away whenever she talked about their future? He finally admitted that he had been considering a private conversation with you, but he refused to tell her exactly what he planned to say. That uncertainty made her even more desperate. She asked whether he wanted closure. He didn't answer. She asked whether he wanted another chance. Again, silence. Then she asked the question she had clearly been afraid to say aloud: "Do you still love them?" This time, he didn't immediately look away. Something huge was waiting for her in his answer, but he chose his words carefully. He said feelings don't disappear simply because circumstances become complicated. And then he added, I spent too long telling myself what I was supposed to feel instead of admitting what I actually feel." She knew exactly who he meant. But there was still one thing she didn't understand. If his feelings were this strong, why hadn't he contacted you already? She asked him directly, expecting hesitation or confusion. Instead, his answer revealed the part of the story he'd been protecting most carefully. He wasn't afraid of the third party's reaction. He was afraid of yours. He didn't know whether you would listen after everything that had happened. He didn't know whether too much time had passed, or whether the distance between you had already changed something permanently. And that was why the message on his phone remained unfinished. But later that night, after the argument had finally gone quiet, he opened it again. This time, he didn't erase the first sentence. He added another. Then another. Until he reached one particular confession that made him stop typing completely, because those few words revealed what he believed was the biggest mistake he had made concerning you. Those unfinished words carried more weight than anything he had admitted during the argument. He stared at them because writing them meant finally accepting something he had spent a long time avoiding. Losing you wasn't simply something that happened to him. Some of his own choices had helped create the distance. He had remained silent when he should have spoken, allowed outside pressure to influence decisions that belonged to his heart, and convinced himself there would always be another opportunity to explain. But yesterday shattered that illusion. For the first time, he seemed to realize that waiting could become a decision of its own. And the longer he waited, the greater the possibility that one day he would finally reach for you and discover you were no longer waiting to hear what he had to say. That realization changed his message completely. He stopped trying to make it sound perfect and began writing what he actually felt. He admitted that there were moments when he wanted to contact you but talked himself out of it. He admitted that certain memories still returned unexpectedly and that comparing the present with what he once felt around you had become impossible to ignore. Then he reached the confession that had frozen his hands over the screen. "I should have fought harder for us when I had the chance." He read that sentence several times. Don't skip, because this is where yesterday's fight suddenly makes much more sense. Earlier, when the third party demanded to know why he couldn't simply leave the past alone, he had almost said those exact words aloud. He stopped himself then. But alone with his phone, there was nobody left to convince except himself. And yet, he still didn't send the message. Something was holding him back, but it wasn't uncertainty about what he wanted. It was the possibility that contacting you could reopen emotions you had worked hard to put behind you. He didn't want to appear suddenly and expect everything to return to the way it once was. So he made a different decision. He saved the message and began preparing for the private conversation the third party had discovered. But she hadn't gone to sleep either. She had been replaying every sentence from their fight, especially his admission about pretending. Then she remembered one tiny detail from earlier that day, something he had casually mentioned before either of them started arguing. Once she connected that detail to the date she had glimpsed on his phone, she realized where he might be planning to go. And instead of confronting him again, she quietly decided she might get there first. By morning, the third party was no longer trying to win another argument. She was watching him carefully, waiting for one small confirmation that her suspicion was right. And it came sooner than expected. He changed part of his schedule without explaining why, checked the time repeatedly, and became unusually protective of his phone. She recognized the signs immediately. The place she had connected to that date wasn't random. It carried a memory linked to you. One he had apparently never forgotten. She asked casually where he was going later, hoping to catch him off guard. He simply said he had something personal to handle. No explanation. No reassurance. That answer told her everything she needed to know. But what she didn't realize was that he had already anticipated another confrontation, and before leaving, he made one quiet change to his plan that would make following him far more difficult. He wasn't trying to create drama or play games. He wanted one honest moment without someone else controlling the conversation. Yesterday's fight had shown him how much outside pressure had shaped his decisions, and he seemed determined not to repeat that pattern. Before walking out, the third party stopped him and asked one final time whether this was about you. He looked at her for several seconds and finally said, "This is about me correcting something I should never have left unresolved." Her face changed instantly. She asked whether correcting it meant leaving her behind. He wouldn't promise anything. Instead, he told her that making promises while his heart was somewhere else had caused enough damage already. Those words ended the conversation. There was nothing left for her to argue against, because for the first time, he wasn't asking permission to understand what he truly wanted. But the biggest surprise came after he left. The third party discovered that the place she expected him to visit wasn't where he was going anymore. He had changed the meeting point. She searched for another clue and found nothing. Meanwhile, he sat alone somewhere quiet, opened the message he had saved, and read that confession again. "I should have fought harder for us when I had the chance." His thumb hovered over the screen. Something had changed since the night before. He wasn't editing anymore. He wasn't deleting anything. He was deciding whether you deserved to hear the entire truth before he ever stood in front of you again. Then he added one final sentence, something far more vulnerable than everything above it. He read the message from beginning to end, took a long breath, and moved his finger toward send. But just before he touched it, an unexpected notification appeared on his screen, and the name attached to it made him freeze. The notification wasn't from you. It was from someone who knew enough about yesterday's argument to understand exactly what was happening, and the message contained only a few words: "She knows where you're going." He stared at the screen, suddenly realizing the third party had been searching for information after he left. But instead of turning around, he became even more certain that the conversation with you could no longer be controlled by anyone else. He locked his phone and continued forward. Something had changed inside him after admitting, "You're asking me to keep pretending I don't know who I really want." Those weren't angry words anymore. They had become a truth he couldn't put back into hiding. And now another question was pressing against him: if he finally reached you, would you believe his feelings were genuine, or would yesterday's courage simply look like another decision that came far too late? Meanwhile, the third party made one last attempt to reach him. Her message wasn't angry this time. It was emotional. She told him to remember everything they had built before making a choice he might regret. For a moment, he stopped and read it carefully. Then he typed a response that surprised even him: "That's exactly why I have to be honest now." He didn't blame her. He didn't mention you by name. He simply refused to continue a situation built on feelings he could no longer pretend were complete. Stay till the end, because his next decision revealed just how serious this had become. Instead of sending you the long message he had written, he copied only one sentence from it into a new message. He wanted to know whether the door to a conversation was even open before placing years of emotion in your hands. But choosing that one sentence became harder than writing the entire confession. He considered saying he missed you, then erased it. He considered apologizing, but that felt too small for everything left unresolved. Finally, he wrote something simple. There's something I should have told you a long time ago, and if you're willing, I'd like the chance to say it honestly. He stared at those words while every consequence seemed to race through his mind. This wasn't a declaration demanding anything from you. It was an invitation to hear the truth. And this time, his thumb came down. The message was sent. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a minute passed. Then another. He put the phone down, trying not to watch the screen. But when it finally lit up again, his heart jumped, because there was now a response waiting. He opened it slowly, and what he saw wasn't rejection or forgiveness. It was one short question from you that forced him to confront the part of yesterday's fight he still hadn't revealed. Your question was simple, but it stopped him cold. Why now? Of everything you could have asked, those two words reached the place he had been avoiding. He couldn't answer with yesterday's argument alone, because the truth had started long before the third party lost control. He looked back through the message he had written but never sent and realized you deserved more than a convenient explanation. So he answered carefully. He told you that yesterday forced him to finally say aloud what he had been hiding from himself. He admitted that when the third party demanded to know who he truly wanted, he could no longer pretend the answer was complicated. But then he revealed something new. The argument hadn't created his decision to reach out. He had already been thinking about contacting you before the fight ever began. Yesterday simply destroyed the last excuse he had for remaining silent. Your response didn't arrive immediately, and that silence affected him more than he expected. For the first time, he had no control over what happened next. He couldn't know what you felt, what you remembered, or whether his honesty had arrived too late. Then another message appeared. You didn't ask whether he still had feelings. You asked what he expected from you. He read the question twice before answering, because this was where he could either repeat his old mistakes or finally do something differently. Nothing you don't freely choose, he wrote. I just don't want you carrying the wrong version of what happened between us. That sentence opened another door. Because there was apparently something about the past you had never been told, something involving a decision he allowed the third party to believe was permanent, even though privately he regretted it almost immediately. And that was the truth he had been afraid to reveal. At a crucial moment, when everything between you could have gone differently, he had stayed quiet while someone else interpreted his silence for him. You were left believing he had willingly chosen another direction and never looked back. But according to what he finally admitted, that wasn't what happened inside him at all. He had questioned that choice almost from the beginning, yet pride, fear, and pressure kept him from correcting the story. Yesterday, when the third party shouted, "Why can't you just forget them?" he finally answered with the words she had feared hearing, "Because I never chose to stop caring." That was the sentence that truly made her lose control. But there was still one missing piece. After reading his confession, you asked him something he hadn't prepared for. Then tell me exactly what happened that day. He stared at the screen, knowing that answering would expose the secret decision that had separated you in the first place.